What is up, guys? In today's video, we're going to be talking about the new Scoped Salvo Augment that was added in this week's update. As always, if you guys do find this video helpful or informative, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and comment down below what you think of this new augment. So this augment gives you 15% more damage, but you lose 15% fire rate on scoped weapons. So the current weapons affected by this are the thermal DMR and the MK Alpha. Like I said, you're trading damage for fire rate, and it's an equal 15% of each. This chart that I'm going to have on screen now is made by ProQs on Reddit, and it shows a comparison of the thermal DMR and MK Alpha before and after the augment. But just to make things simple in this video, I'm really going to focus on the blue versions of these weapons just to kind of paint a picture of what this augment does. And that's kind of like the average rarity of weapons. It affects every rarity pretty much the same. They get like the same improvement. So the blue MK Alpha goes from a 7 fire rate to a 5.95 fire rate. All of the rarities have the same fire rate, so they all go to that 5.95 fire rate. And the blue variant goes from 24 body damage to 28 body damage, and the headshot goes from 36 damage to 41 damage. So you're gaining about 4 body damage and about 5 headshot damage roughly, but you're trading off a little bit of fire rate. The thermal DMR goes from a 5 fire rate to a 4.25 fire rate, and the blue version goes from 35 body damage to 40 and 58 headshot to 66. So 5 body damage and then 8 headshot damage on the thermal DMR. So as you can see, neither the downside or the gain is that big of a difference maker on this augment. You don't lose a ridiculous amount of fire rate, and you don't gain a ridiculous amount of damage either. They're still kind of within the same ballpark of what they initially already were. The sticking point for a lot of people with this augment, though, from what I've seen and when I've seen people talk about it, is going to be the DPS, because the blue MK goes from 168 to 164 DPS, and the thermal DMR goes from 175 to 171. So on each weapon, you lose about 4 DPS, which DPS is damage per second, and I've seen people calculate this out to a 2% reduction in DPS. And so many people look at that and they're like, okay, this augment is trash, never use it, you lose DPS. But I don't think that is a good kind of mindset to have. I've talked about this before in other videos, but I feel like using DPS as the end-all be-all stat is not good. Like, it's not a useless stat by any means, but it can be pretty misleading because the DPS, or damage per second stat, is just the fire rate and the damage, like how much damage it'll put out within a second of fire rate. And that assumes perfect conditions, like you don't miss a single bullet, the enemy isn't doing anything to throw off your aim, recoil and bloom or any of that isn't really factored into any of this. It's just the raw damage and fire rate of the weapon. So if you are perfect, if your aim is just 100% and the enemy player doesn't do anything to throw off your aim and just sits there, then sure, that DPS is going to be accurate. But like, there's so many things in the game that kind of make that stat misleading. Not many players, if any, have just perfect accuracy with these high fire rate or like main AR style weapons. And then another reason why the DPS stat can be misleading is like, it depends on the style of weapon. So weapons like the Gold Mammoth pistol and the Havoc pump actually have half the DPS of the common SMG. But most players would assume, or would rather take a Gold Mammoth pistol or a Gold Havoc pump over the white SMG. And why is that? The white SMG has better DPS, so obviously it's better, right? But just like the way those weapons allow you to play and deal massive damage within a very short amount of time, like you can play cover well. If your opponent's playing cover well, it's not like you need them to just sit out there and take it. You're not going to be as exposed while dealing damage. So like, even though the DPS would imply the common SMG is much better than the Gold Mammoth pistol or Gold Havoc pump, I think pretty much every player would agree that the Gold Mammoth pistol or Gold Havoc pump have a much larger impact on the game. And that's obviously a very specific scenario, but I'm just trying to paint the picture that DPS, while it's important, it isn't the end-all be-all stat because it assumes perfect conditions and it doesn't really take into account how you're going to play with the weapon. And like I was saying before, if your aim, you need perfect aim for that DPS stat to matter or to be relevant. But if you don't have the best aim, I think this augment is perfect. Like if you struggle to control the recoil of the MK Alpha, the Scoped Salvo version with a lower fire rate has much lower recoil. And so if you are someone that was struggling to control that recoil, while the flat out DPS might be lower with Scoped Salvo, you're probably going to get a higher DPS in actual use than you would with the normal one because you're going to be landing more shots easier. So it's like you could have the best weapon in the world with the highest DPS ever, but if you don't hit any shots with it, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? And that's kind of how I feel about the Scoped Salvo Augment. If you struggle to control the recoil with the MK Alpha, I think that is the perfect use case for this augment, and I know there's a lot of you out there because I get comments about that on videos fairly often. So like, if you're in that kind of category, if you have struggled to use the MK Alpha because of the recoil, I would definitely recommend giving the Scoped Salvo Augment a try and seeing if you like it more. Because like I said, if you are hitting more shots as a result of the gun having less recoil, then it's going to be the better weapon for you, regardless of what like the stats actually say. You know what I'm saying? In general, I personally don't like it on the MK Alpha. I don't have too big of a problem controlling the recoil on the MK Alpha, so I'd rather just have the base version and then use my augments on something else. But I do think there's a lot of players out there that will actually really enjoy the MK Alpha with the Scoped Salvo Augment. The thermal DMR, however, I actually liked a little bit more with this augment. Without it, I feel like the thermal DMR shoots faster than you want to shoot it anyways, because like when you're full spamming the thermal DMR, the recoil is kind of a lot, and it's weird to control recoil on a single fire weapon like that. Pretty much the only thing you can do is shoot it slower. So if I wanted to consistently land shots with the thermal DMR, I was going to have to be shooting it slower than it can shoot anyways. So with this augment, you get down to a fire rate that is much more manageable when full spamming, like the recoil of the weapon is more manageable when full spamming, but you also get more damage trade for that. And it's like, I was already going to be shooting it probably closer to this lower fire rate anyways to consistently land shots. So sure, I'll take that added damage on top of it. And the headshots on the thermal DMR with the Scoped Salvo Augment, I think, are a lot better than without it. And that is one of the nice things you want out of a DMR, I feel like, is a nice solid headshot damage. Either way, though, I really do not like the thermal DMR. If for some reason I just had to use the thermal DMR, I would prefer to have Scoped Salvo with it, but I would just rather never use the thermal DMR ever. Of the DMR weapons we've had in the game, like the Cobra DMR and the regular DMR, I think the thermal one is far and away my least favorite. I don't know what it is about this weapon, but it just has never felt good to me, like at all, to use. I can't put my finger on it, but I just never feel right when I'm using this weapon. And even though I didn't really like the Cobra DMR or the regular DMR, I could use those weapons and do fine. Like, actually, the regular DMR I thought was really solid. But, like, the thermal one, for whatever reason, just feels very off to me. And so I think the Scoped Salvo version of the thermal DMR is an improvement over the base one. I still don't want to use it. But that is going to be it for this video. In summary, if you struggle to control the recoil on the MK Alpha, I would definitely give the Scoped Salvo Augment a try. You lose a little bit of DPS, but like I said, in practicality, if you are someone who is struggling to consistently land shots anyways, you're probably going to be landing more shots with this augment, and that is going to result in you putting out more damage over the fight, regardless of what the raw DPS stats say. And then as far as the thermal DMR goes, I do think the Scoped Salvo version is a bit better, so if you like the thermal DMR, maybe consider trying it on that as well. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. I have perma's like sensory overload playing this game with all the audio. Like dinos on me. It's invisible.